All right, so the big idea for today's investigation is what would a graph of the solutions in the first quadrant, so we're not looking at a 4-quadrant graph, just a 1-quadrant graph of an inequality ax plus by is less than or greater than or equal to c. So very similar to our warm-up, but only now we're adding the inequality symbol. So here's what we've got. Vince finds out that his family's car emits an average of 0.75 pounds of carbon dioxide per mile. The SUV that they have emits an average of 1.25 pounds of CO2 per mile. And obviously CO2 is a greenhouse gas. We'd like to limit it as best we can. So you can see where we're going with this. Suppose Vince's family wants to limit their CO2 emissions to their car to at most 600 pounds per month. How many miles could they drive their car? Well, let's go on with the questions and we'll start answering them together. Suppose Vince's family wants to limit CO2 emissions from their SUV to at most 600 pounds per month. How many miles could they drive their SUV? And finally, suppose they want to limit their total load for both vehicles to at most 600 pounds. What are some car SUV miles that would allow them to meet this configuration? All right, so let's give ourselves a little bit more room. So looking here, we know that the car produces 0.75 pounds per mile. So we know that we want to keep 600, and it says at most. So are we allowed to equal 600? And the answer is yes, we can, but we don't want to go over 600. So we want 600 to be greater than or equal to the 0.75 pounds per mile times the number of miles, which will give us the amount of CO2 that we're going to produce from the car. For the SUV, it's going to be very similar. Again, we have the 600. It says at most, so we have this. And the SUV, I think was, let's see, it was 1.25. 1.25 times, and instead of miles here, you know what, because we're going to have miles for the SUV too. Let's use C for car miles, shall we? And S for SUV miles. Well, in the real world, you're going to be driving both cars. So again, we want to limit it to 600 or less pounds of CO2. And so our CO2 emissions from our car are 0.75 times the number of miles that we drive the car plus 1.25 times the number of miles we drive the SUV. Now, looking at this one, I could be a sort of a smart aleck and say I'm not going to drive the car at all, I'm not going to drive the SUV at all, and obviously I'll stay under 600 pounds of CO2. But that's not going to help us because we really need to find that boundary. Where can we maximize our driving miles and still stay within 600 pounds of CO2? So we want to go up right up to that limit of 600 pounds of CO2. In other words, excuse me, we need to find that boundary line. So I'm going to find some SUV and car mile conditions that will get us exactly 600. So what I would normally do in this launch in the class is I would tell you right now, go ahead and figure out one point that would satisfy this. But obviously, in a video, I can't do that. So here's what I would suggest. Let's make a little table. We'll have car miles and SUV miles. Figure out how far you can go in the SUV if you don't drive the car at all. Really, that's what that's getting at. And then turn that around. How far can you go in the car if you don't drive the SUV at all? That's what this expression is asking you to do. And then for funsies, because math is funsy, find one more point. Find one more point that would work. Throw in, I don't know, 200 car miles or something like that. See how far you can go in the SUV or any other car miles you want to pick. So then, here we go. Suppose Jared's family wants to be exactly 600 pounds. Give 6 pairs. That's what we started to do. Write an equation for that model. Graph your equation. For B, suppose the family wants to limit their to at most. So we're turning, so the difference between these two is this is going to be just a line. And this one here you're turning into a graph of an inequality. And then for your bonus question, we have a different family that drives a minivan. I could never do that. I mean, I could, but I don't want a minivan. But then they also have a hybrid car, which is kind of cool. And so you're doing the same thing, and they're trying to limit their poundage of CO2 to 500 pounds per month. And remember, gas has mass, so that's why we have this weight. So that's what you're doing. Go for it, give it a shot, and check back on the summary video to see how you did.